laying on the floor, I finally realized that oh my, that all controlling our soul was only my mind.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today we're sitting down with a brand new guest. His name is Blair Coyle. He is a musician whose music helps people who are deconstructing feel seen and put words on their experiences. So he's here today to talk to us about his music and his journey. Blair, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you.
Yeah, great to be here.
Thank you. So before we get into things, maybe just a little bit about yourself, especially for people who are new to you. Who is Blair Coyle? How do you spend your days? Tell us what we need to know.
Yeah, I'm of course, first musician. I'm a photographer, videographer. I'm from British Columbia in Canada, so I was raised in the mountains, and I really love getting out and exploring in nature, and being outside. I love traveling and exploring new places and having new experiences and adventures.
Awesome. And you have you live out on the West Coast.
Yeah, a little town called Nelson, BC.
How long have you been there?
Grew up here and then moved back. I went down to Australia and New Zealand for about 6.5 years.
Gotcha. Okay. Moved back. Gotcha. I knew you were like bouncing around, so I wasn't sure when you landed back.
I'm actually moving out to Vancouver Island in about a month. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You might have moved as many times as we moved. We moved for a while. It was like all within New Jersey, within like a 10-mile radius. Then we got really brave. It was like 5 or 6 times, and we got really brave and went to North Carolina. So,
dang.
Yeah. So we made our own big trips. That's
nice.
Awesome. So take us in your spiritual journey a little bit. You know, you told me in your email that your music has been a way to help you process your religious trauma, work through various stages of your deconstruction. So I'd love to hear a little bit about like how you were raised to think about God, what made you rethink things, what was that kind of like turning point for you, and then what has the journey been like from that point on?
Yeah, for sure. I was raised kind of in a few different traditions in kind of mainline church, you know, from more conservative evangelical to more charismatic Pentecostal expressions. So I got a few different flavors there. And, you know, so I had the real kind of conservative, you know, infallible word of God sort of viewpoint from the youth group days that I went to in a more conservative evangelical church, and the whole kind of purity culture experience in the 2000s there, and then got more into the kind of charismatic world, NAR sort of stuff in my later teens, and I kind of got a real desire to pursue that further, because I feel like there's a turning point where I saw in the conservative evangelical world where it was very kind of just cold, and I was like, well, if this religion spirituality thing's supposed to be about a supernatural being, there should be something supernatural about it. So that's what really drew me to the charismatic world. And I kind of came to a bit of a crossroads in my later teens, and I was just noticing the attitude that a lot of Christians had towards ourselves versus the outsiders. It was very othering of, you know, I remember having a mindset going through high school of like, you know, kind of just clinging to my youth group friends because everyone was the sinners and they're going to hell. And so it was kind of isolating in that kind of way, and very judgmental. So I was kind of done with that aspect, but I was also like, okay, if there's something to this, I got to give it my all. I can't just like half-ass it and throw in the towel. So I decided to actually join up with Youth with a Mission, YWAM, which is a like charismatic evangelical NAR missionary organization, and left when I was 20 in 2015 and went down to Australia and joined up there. Did like their initial like introduction 6 months course where you do a like kind of charismatic experiences with God, encounter stuff, and like some theological teaching, and then do like a mission trip. And then I did came back for a worship leader school, and that kind of I got just hooked on that culture. It was a very just like high energy, really exciting.
It's very addicting.
Yeah, very addicting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I ended up staying in that for almost 5 years, and that's when things started to unravel for me during like the last year of me being there, and when I started to write songs about my confusion and disillusionment.
Yeah. So what, like, was there something specifically that happened that kind of triggered the questions? Was it more like you're kind of like saturated in this world and then you start to just ask questions about it? Like what was that moment like for you? Or was there maybe no, maybe was it more of a gradual thing or?
I think it was gradual as it started to cool off. You know, the longer you're in there, the novelty starts to wear off, and you start realizing that a lot of this is just hype and excitement. And, you know, where's the actual results? You know, there's all this like talk of healings and miracles and all these like crazy things happening. And then, you know, you go on these outreaches and, you know, you're measuring your success by how many hands you have raised at like a gathering, like, and you count that as a salvation, and you get these tallies, whatever. And I was like, what is the actual result of what we're doing here? Like, we're just going and patting ourselves on the back, and these people aren't really changed. It's just that we have numbers now, so we can say that these people groups are reached, you know? And so on top of that, and then just a lot of the culture things were very controlling behaviorally around, you know, it's like a very, again, very emotionally intense environment. And there's a lot of young people coming down and meeting each other from all over the world. And they're very like overly controlling when it comes to like relationships and dating. And, you know, people were getting sent home for kissing on outreach or something, you know, like falling in love in this kind of emotionally intense environment. And then, I don't know, stuff like being forced to quit smoking and having people having to like watch your every move. And I just felt like, yeah, it came to the point where I was like, felt a bit paranoid. And I noticed a lot of people felt kind of paranoid because of being scared of, you know, being in trouble. You know, you hear these horror stories of, you know, former staff or students that have been made examples of that are sent home for, you know, not, I don't know, either like sleeping together or doing silly stuff that like you'd have the space to navigate in normal life.
Yeah.
It even went to the point where it was like people were scared to put one of their big toe inside across the threshold of like the room of the opposite sex kind of thing.
Yeah, I went to a private Christian school from the 4th through 12th grades, and I can remember, I mean, super controlling there. I mean, we were pressured in terms of the music that we were, you know, encouraged to listen to, the books that we were allowed to read, you know, the way that we dressed, guys and girls alike. I can remember the principal going around the hallways in junior high with a note card, and he would actually put it up to the knee of the girls, and then if their skirt was any higher than the note card, they got sent home. And I was thought to myself, like, that's so weird that like this older guy is walking around the hallways getting like down to the knees of these girls. I'm like, this is so creepy. Like, you know, I didn't have the words for it really then, but then I'm looking back, I'm like, that is so weird. But like all that kind of stuff, and then like music, like I'm a huge Green Day fan, and I liked their music back then, but that was like a forbidden band in that school. Like we were not allowed. There was like one Green Day CD or cassette that was going around of the Dookie album, and people were like passing it on to each other to like listen to it at home and stuff like that. Like it was like super controlled environment with that. The books that we read, they had what's called the Bible House, was like a bookstore, and all the books that were in there were like approved by like the pastors and stuff like that. And like if there were authors that, you know, were like forbidden because they thought differently, like those people, they weren't allowed in the bookstore and stuff. So again, like that controlled environment is such a real thing. And I think when you tell people about that, if they didn't grow up in that world, they look at you like, what? Like that doesn't make any sense. But like when you're speaking my language, like when you're talking, I'm like, yes, that's exactly what my experience was like as well.
And then you talk to the adults that were kind of enforcing that, and they can't even recognize that that was weird.
Yeah, not at all. That's like it's like it's normal. It's like, well, of
Yeah.
course this is the way it is. Yeah. And then even getting to college, I went to Bible college, and there it was the same kind of thing, but now you've got dorms and stuff. So to your point, relationships were very policed, very patrolled. You had the RAs in the dorms and stuff like that, like always doing dorm checks. Had to be like lights out at a certain time, and like, it was just super, super weird. But again, like I didn't think much of it because that was the world that I was in. But now that I'm post that world, looking back, playing Monday morning quarterback, it's like, man, so many things about that are just super, super weird.
Yeah, it's so weird. And then also like creates really high stakes for even the beginning stages of dating where it's like, all right,
Yeah.
you go not being together at all, no dates, to like, all right, they're on the track to marriage.
Yeah. The ring by spring was a big thing in the Bible college. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it sets you up for not, I mean, it almost sets you up for failure. It's like they're saying they're trying to set you up for success, but at the end of the day, like when you get married and you're in it, you're like, man, I feel like I'm completely out of my element. I have no idea what's going on. And it just puts like a lot of pressure on a marriage that, you know, a few rounds of premarital counseling isn't gonna prepare you for. I remember when we got married, it was like, man, this is like all stuff that I had no idea what's going on. I don't know how to live with this person.
I'm so glad that I didn't fall into that and end up getting married in that environment because leaving, I had to kind of really undo a lot of that mindset.
So the other thing you talk about too, I mean, you talk about um, like the theology, I think is another big piece. And I would love to hear a little bit about, the you talk about like religious trauma, and I feel like that's almost like a buzzword in the deconstruction world is trauma, and I think that sometimes it's used so much that a lot of people who are outside of that world maybe don't take it as seriously. And I was wondering if you maybe could talk a little bit about what religious trauma has looked like in your situation, and then how do you respond to like the pushback? Because a lot of people would say, it's not trauma, it's just stuff happens to everybody. People might make mistakes and whatever. Like just kind of get over it. This is just kind of the way it is. Like, what's your response to that?
Yeah, first of all, I'd say that it really depends who you are.
Hmm.
I think I'm a very tender-hearted kid, so stuff really affected me.
Yeah.
And I think where it starts is just like a long exposure of foundational beliefs about yourself and about reality that are really damaging. Like starting out, as a toddler being told, pray this prayer. You have to believe that Jesus died for your sins so you can go to heaven when you die, and that you're shielded from God's wrath by the blood of Jesus. Kind of sets a foundational belief about yourself that you're broken and that you're bad, and there's a lot of shame under that, but at the same time, you're somehow redeemed. So there's this tension within you from the beginning, and so that kind of sets you on this constant battle of trying to believe hard enough that you have been saved, that you are redeemed, and that's a kind of crazy way to live. And I think eventually that just really created a very obsessive inner thought life and prayer life, because I was trying to always obsessively keep track of have I prayed for forgiveness for this sin, or and then growing up, you have those foundational beliefs, and then growing up in an environment where they don't have a healthy relationship with sexuality or don't talk about it in a good way, you're really afraid to share about that when you're going through puberty as a teenager, and you just creates this whole other level of self-hatred and hiding. And so just living in that kind of mindset is very damaging and really wrecks your sense of self and identity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I talk about this a lot on the podcast, but, looking back over my time in that private Christian school, and even like now, even like thinking back on those days makes me get like shaky inside, because it was there were so many aspects of what I was taught as a child that looking back on it now really were traumatizing. Like I think about sitting in a classroom in the sixth grade. We were in our Bible class, and the teacher was taking us through the book of Revelation, which is no light reading anyway, but certainly not for a junior high student, you know? And so, we're going through it from the perspective of like the Left Behind kind of aspect of things. And we watched this movie, A Thief in the Night, in class, and it was just horrifying. And I can remember going home and being scared. I never told my parents about it because I was scared that if I told my parents, they would just probably tell me what I want to hear. Like, oh yeah, we believe all those things and we've said the sinner's prayer and we're good, and we're gonna go to heaven. Don't worry about it. I would think, well, what if they tell me that, but they don't really mean it? They just kind of tell me that so that I'm not scared. And so I didn't tell my parents about this inner wrestling I was having, and I was having these nightmares at night, like I was waking up thinking everybody in the house had been taken, or waking up and thinking that I've been taken. And I was having these dreams that like I was floating away, like my parents were down there screaming, and and Jesus is like, be happy because you're coming with me. And I'm like, but my family is like they're lost now. But having all these dreams and literally growing up with that, and then going into Bible college and things like that, and learning about more of these things. It was really, really, it really did a lot to me, and it really took me a long time to kind of mentally wrap my mind around how damaging that really was for me. And when I got into like the place of deconstruction, like that whole topic of hell and revelation and the rapture was like something I really, really like dove into because I was so deep in me, and I was like, there just got to be this can't be reality. Like there has to be other ways to understand this stuff. And so coming into contact with people, even like Rob Bell, in his book Love Wins, was a huge thing for me because I remember reading that book thinking, oh, like there's other ways to think about this. Thank God. Somebody's out there talking differently.
Here's that book was such a no-no. And like when I finally read it, I felt like I was being so naughty. And then I read it and I was that's it. He literally just said, like, what if God's not a monster?
Yeah, right? I always thought it was so funny that book, Love Wins, he got hammered so hard for that. But then his other book, Jesus Wants to Save the Christians, was like, meh, whatever. Like, nobody really blinked an eye at that one. It's like that one was worse. It was worse, so to speak, than Love Wins was. So funny. So is there any particular... I'm curious, like any particular piece of theology or your upbringing that was like the biggest hurdle in your deconstruction? Like, was there anything that was really difficult for you to process? Anything like for me that, like hell and the rapture or something I really sunk my teeth into? Is there anything like for you that was really like, I've got to go deeper into this, like I've got to know more about this, or like what was that part of the journey like for you?
I think, yeah, hell was definitely one of those. Mm-hmm. Big time. The rapture wasn't as big. I was exposed to it, but it wasn't really a massive part of.
Okay.
Yeah, and then just exploring. One of the things that really got me going was reading this book by N.T. Wright called "The Day the Revolution Began."
Yeah.
Presenting another perspective on the atonement, and I didn't even realize there were other ways of looking at it other than Jesus, like taking the punishment for sin. Or whatever kind of weird blended version that the Christians believe, that there's, you look at worship songs and it's like, some Christus Victor in there, like forever he is glorified and victorious over sin and death. But like no one actually tells you, oh, these are the atonement theories where those ideas come from.
Right.
It's like, wait a second. So there's there's like 6 beliefs about what the cross even did.
Yeah.
So it's probably not a thing.
Right.
And like if there's 6 options, no one knows.
And everybody thinks that one of them is right.
Exactly.
Right.
So with so many things like that, even in YWAM, there were a few teachers that were closer to progressive side of things. Thankfully, like there are some like more culty sides to YWAM, but then there are some really good people in there. Mm-hmm. Where there's this one guy who read a lot of Greg Boyd
Mm.
and teaching about some of those perspectives. And so I was able to actually get exposed to a lot of different ideas, or even having one class there that was about worldview and being able to actually step outside yourself and identify that you have a worldview and what your assumptions are. And so like that really started me deconstructing in a lot of ways. And then also just kind of diving in to more critical scholarship of the Bible and where it came from, how it was written. And, that started with, the Bible Project within kind of evangelical circles. And then that moved to more stuff like Rob Bell, like what is the Bible? Just slowly, piece by piece, it just clicked. And then, I got into Bart Ehrman, and then he lays it out pretty clearly, like, oh, the Gospels are not really history. Like there's some history, but there's a lot of mythology mixed in there. And I was like, well, that's the last pillar for me.
Right. That's the last piece of the Jenga tower.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so true. I think that, I look back like on my journey, and there's so many moments that were like, didn't feel like they were huge in the moment, but now looking back, I'm like, oh, that was a huge monumental moment. Like I think back in seminary, it was an evangelical school, and I took a hermeneutics class, which is like, studying how to read the Bible and what to do with this thing and how do you understand these texts. And the professor was, I didn't realize it then, but he was actually on the podcast not that long ago. I brought him on to talk about this experience, but he was like a square peg in a round hole there. And I think he fit, but he didn't fit. And in that class, I remember he broke us all up into groups of like, 3 or 4 people in the group. And he gave us each the same scripture passage. And he said, all right, you guys over there are Calvinists. You guys over there are Arminians. You guys over there are Baptists. He went through the whole thing. He said, write me a sermon, from that perspective. And so, oh yeah, we're all seminary students. We're going to write this sermon. And we all wrote obviously different sermons. And we all came to different conclusions from the very same passage based upon our experience. And the whole point was, we were all done, and he said, you can't read the text apart from your experience. And that was like the end of the class. We all just went home after that, and I was like, what? Like that just blew my mind. Like I had so many questions, and I can remember people arguing in the class, and like he was really, really making us think and really stretching us. And again, like I didn't know what to do with that back then. But looking back on it, I'm like, that was a monumental moment, because all my life I had been taught that this book means one thing and every story means one thing. And if anybody understands it differently than this, like they're wrong. But in that class, I saw all these people from different perspectives bringing valid interpretations to the text. I don't know what to do with that. And I went on to pastor a church and be in ministry and stuff, but that always stuck with me. And when I started to really deconstruct, I went back to that moment in my mind. I'm like, that was a pivotal moment for me.
Yeah, definitely. And now looking back, it's like, how did I ever think that? It's so human, and a lot of it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, we're resting everything on what Paul said about the resurrection. That's the only evidence we have, is that he said people saw Jesus after he resurrected.
Yeah.
And stuff like, I don't know about, how all of humanity fell because of Adam, but the sacrifice of Jesus, you still have to choose it.
Right. It's like Adam's more powerful than Jesus, right? Like Adam's sin is more powerful than what Jesus did on the cross. Sorry, Jesus, you are a failure.
Smart.
Right? And I find it more now, like we have a daughter, she's 7, and she's starting to ask some different questions about like what I used to do and what all these books on my shelf are and stuff. So we're talking about God and Jesus and the Bible. And like, I tell her these stories about Jesus from the Gospels, and she's like, well, so-and-so in school says the Bible, everything that says the Bible says it happened. Well, I said, well, some people believe that. I said, I used to believe that. She goes, you used to believe that? I'm like, yeah. I said, but I don't necessarily believe that anymore. And she's like, well, why not? I'm like, well, I said, I've learned a lot about like the culture that these books were written in, and I've learned that, what people in those cultures valued. So whereas you and I, we live in America, we value history, put that in quotes, we value looking back and telling how something happened and exactly what the people said and what they did and all the different things. I said back then people weren't like as concerned with telling those stories like that. So they were more concerned with telling stories that inspired people and telling stories that challenged people. So they would take a real life figure like somebody like Jesus who really inspired them and they would tell these stories that yeah, maybe had some truth to them, but they would always stretch them and grow them, not to lie, but because they wanted to inspire the person who was reading it. And I said, I think that when you look at the stories through that perspective, as opposed to somebody going around with a Jesus cam filming everything he did and said, I said, I think there's like so much more to wonder about with the stories. And so we've had these really interesting conversations that I'm so glad I can have with her as a 7-year-old because when I was 7 years old, I wasn't getting that at all. And I came to the text with a lot of fear, whereas she's coming to these stories with a lot of wonder and mystery, which I think is great.
That's cool. One thing that really gets me is that there's so many apologists going around claiming that there's still eyewitness accounts and all this stuff. And it's like, it's really annoying. It's like if they could just actually present the facts and then let people choose.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Because I thought the texts that we had were like the original texts. Like I thought, even in seminary, like I thought we had like these original documents, and I thought that there were these eyewitness accounts. And then I got into Barterman stuff too, and I was like, holy moly, And I started to, who is this Bart guy? Because I was always told to stay away from him when I was in seminary. Don't read that stuff; that'll get you in trouble. And then I started reading it. I'm like, this guy makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
I feel like he's presenting facts to me, and I can make my own decision. Or what was I getting when I was in seminary, paying this education?
Argument in the apologetic circle is like, this could have happened.
Yep, a lot of could haves, a lot of could haves, and we hope this happened. Well, we don't really know for sure. All right, so I'd love to get into your music a little bit. Your music is fantastic. By the way, everybody should go and download some of your stuff. But in what ways does your journey come through your music, and in what ways has music kind of helped you in this deconstruction process? And maybe you could give us an example. You can play the song for us or a snippet of the song or whatever, but I'd love to hear some of the story behind it, like how the idea came for the song, maybe some of the creative process, because I'm nerdy like that. But I'd love to hear just more about your music and your faith and how the two intertwine.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I wrote the songs off of my debut EP that just came out a few days ago. It's called Apostasy Anthems. I wrote them over about 4 years, starting when I was in YWAM. And it kind of tells a story from the initial just confusion and disillusionment. And I didn't really know what was happening. It was something like just brewing under the surface. And it felt like pieces were falling apart and something was shifting beneath me. But I didn't really know what was going on. And then I wrote a song, the next one, A Miss. So the first one's called Carousel that I wrote. That's about the disillusionment. The second one's called A Miss. And that was just after I had a real awakening to see the control and toxicity of the institution I was a part of. And it felt like I'd just woken up and seen it, and I was still there. And it was incredibly isolating. And I was like, it was like really felt very traumatized and on edge at that point because it didn't feel like I was safe. I was still in this environment where people felt like they were just kind of in this groupthink mindset. And so that song's about, kind of calling that out and talking about my experience living in that environment and kind of just like wishing people well, but I'm not staying in this. And then I left YWAM and moved to New Zealand, and I did that because I needed somewhere to go to just have space where no one knew my name, to process everything, ask all the questions, listen to thousands of hours of podcasts. And so I wrote this song called Looking for the Light. And it's a real kind of process of looking back on where I'd come from in my childhood and recognizing the indoctrination that I'd been raised in and a lot of trauma there, but also pointing myself back to the things that I've found real, that I've found connection in, that I've found peace in, and just being connected to myself, others, in nature, going back to those real, pure experiences, and ending that song off with, you know, there's still so many answers left to find, and I'll never see the end. While I'm still, few things will stay the same, but faith, hope, and love, they will remain. And so that was kind of where I wanted to be heading and encourage people to move into, because at the time, it was like 2020, 2021 when I was writing that, and that was a real peak of the deconstruction community. In full force there. And I felt there's a lot of bitterness and people getting stuck in that place of just being stuck on what they don't like about their past and just being in this loop. But I was like, okay, we can come to terms with that, but let's move on to something better. Something that is true. That's not based on certainty, but it's just based on being.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, I wrote a song, the last song that I wrote, which is the first song on the EP. It's called Winds of October. The song is referring to a experience when I was in New Zealand where I just was lying on the floor one night in this Airbnb in New Zealand, and I was wrestling with so many questions about my faith and where I'd come from. And I just had this epiphany and realized that the God that I had believed in, that was a bit of a monster, was actually just a construct in my mind that had been given. And I remember like envisioning this God in my mind, this construct, and saying, let that fucker die. And so that song, The Winds of October, starts with that line, it was the night that God died. It kind of takes you through this whole overarching journey of that death and rebirth journey of that old concept of God dying and me being reborn into this place of freedom and uncertainty and mystery, but being free in that to be on a journey of discovery. And the Winds of October line, the winds of October whispered the winter is over, refers to a time when I was in New Zealand at a retreat. I went to a progressive church for a while down there that was deconstruction friendly. And so we went on a retreat and went out one night. And I remember just being in the depth at the very bottom of the pit and like, where do I go from here? I feel like everything has been a lie. I don't know what weighs down. And I just felt this, like these words, this whisper inside of me of like, the winter is over. And it was just like this, I don't know, this seed of hope that there is still room for resurrection. There was still a path forward out of all this falling apart and all this death that had happened, the death of identity, all this fear and confusion. And so it's a bit of a play on words there when it says the winds of October whispered the winter is over, because it was in New Zealand. October, so seasons are different. But yeah, that's the 4 songs on my EP there. And so it's that whole overarching journey of beginning to end of a deconstruction story.
Yeah, that's so good. I think for our listeners, I'm going to play a song, I think in the beginning of our episode, and then I'll play a song at the end of our episode to kind of close it out. But I was pulling up while you were talking, the Looking for Light song is what I really appreciate, because that line there at the end that you mentioned, I'll never see the end while I'm still alive. And it makes me feel like something I've come to appreciate in deconstruction and this part of my journey is that I feel like I was always taught growing up that it's the end that matters, right? It's the goal. Got to get to heaven when you die. Like that's you got to have your soul saved to save as many souls as you can, because it's that end result. Like that's the prize. And now I'm in this place where I'm like, no, it's the journey. Like that's the prize. And I feel like it's the wrestling, and it's the questions, and um it's the becoming. It's the becoming of who you have always been, and the remembering of who you are. And like I feel like every layer of the onion that comes off, I feel like I discover a different part of myself that's always been, but's been hidden. And I feel like that I love that. Like I'm never gonna see the end while I'm still alive. And that's okay with me. I feel like back then that would have been horrible just to think something like that. But now I'm like, yes, like that just rings so true in my heart. And I think that's even like why I love art so much, and like painting and stuff, because I feel like once I'm done, I put the final stroke on the canvas. I'm ready for the next thing, because it's all about the making of it. It's the creation. It's the journey through the very beginning of the sketch to the final thing, and then I'm ready to go do another one because I want that journey again. And I feel like that's something I really appreciate about that song.
Yeah, thanks. Love that.
Yeah. And two, the part about the one about, God being dead. I remember I said to one of my friends who's like a mentor kind of figure in my life, and I was asking all the questions, and I was so angry because I felt like, I don't know if you felt like this, but I felt like I went through so much schooling, Bible college and seminary, and then I read like a Bart Ehrman book, and I'm like, I never even heard of this.
Yeah.
How in the world do have I been in private Christian school from the fourth through 12th grades, 3 years in an MDiv program, 3 years in a doctoral program, and I've never heard of the stuff that this man is talking about? What world was I living in for all this time? I was like, even if I wasn't taught, even if I was taught that what he was teaching was wrong, fine, but I wasn't even exposed to it. Like I didn't know about the Gospel of Mary. I didn't know about the Gnostic texts. Really, I didn't know what they were about. I didn't know, how the Bible is like put together. I didn't like know any of these things, and I found myself so angry. And I was like, I can't believe this. Like I've been, what a scam this was. I've been sold all these different lies. And I remember I said to my friend, I said, I feel like God is just dead. Like I feel like I don't even know if God is real. And my friend said, he said to me, he said, what's happening is your version of God is dying.
Yeah,
And he said,
exactly.
that doesn't mean that God necessarily is dead unless you decide that you don't believe in God, that's fine. But he said, your version of God that you were handed is falling apart. And he said, it's going to be angering and painful. But he said, once the smoke clears and everything kind of settles, who knows what you're going to be left with. And he said, that day might not be tomorrow. It might not be next week. It might be 5 years from now when all those emotions kind of settle. But he said, that's kind of the fun part of the process, is seeing what's remained once the fires stop burning. And so for me, again, that quote about, God being dead is also something that rings really true for me in my journey.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Because it's the beliefs about God that don't hold up to scrutiny that need to die.
Yeah.
And let that burn and see, what remains in the ashes. And for me, that's definitely a God that's not the anthropomorphized superhuman God that you find in the Bible. It's just, it's mysterious, and that's about it.
So what has been like, when you look back over your life, because a lot of people, one of the things I think a lot of the critics of deconstruction say is that, well, it's just, you just want to go and have sex, and you just want to go and you want to live this sinful life and have permission to do whatever it is that you want. And, so deconstructing, what is true gives you license to do all the things that are wrong. And so like, I'm curious, like when you look back over your life, like what's the biggest way that you, Blair, have evolved and grown for the good, as you have deconstructed and you've left behind those things? Like what's the biggest marking, the biggest difference of Blair then and Blair today?
I would say trusting my own intuition instead of letting institutions try to shame me into what to believe or tell me what is wrong.
The heart is deceitful above all things, Blair. Right?
There's all sorts of verses that that's about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a big thing, is trusting myself, because I think that's a big part of the religious trauma thing, is that you have these people telling you that these natural things in life are wrong.
Hmm.
And a lot of the time in the Bible, they're considered wrong for very cultural, contextual reasons.
Yeah.
And so just kind of trusting your gut and having the best intentions is enough, I think. And yeah, I think I had to undo a lot of that fear and need for approval from like people in authority to feel like I was okay, or like, you know, a lot of people pleasing and trying to be a perfect person. I just kind of let myself be on the journey, and it's okay to make mistakes. That's how you form as a human.
Yeah. 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 Learning to listen to that intuition is a huge piece, because I can, man, like, again, Monday morning quarterback, but like looking at myself in those Bible classrooms and those seminary classrooms, you know, you're always taught that somebody else knew better than you. Like, the professors know what you need. The pastors know what you need. They know what God really wants for you. What you feel inside, that's not something you should really listen to, because that could bring you astray. So always going for like the next new book that just came out, written by the next like Max Lucado, or the next, you know, the next big person who wrote the next big book that I had to read. Yeah. And then, you know, like what, you know, being involved in that Bible study in church, like being involved in every single part of those things so that I could hear from the pastor and make sure that I'm, you know, paying super attentive when I'm in church, because I'm going to get that sermon. And then the professor is like, I want to be in that inner circle that all the professors seem to have around them, of those key students who are, you know, hanging on their every word, because like they know what's best. And living my life for like that for so long, I really just pushed down that voice, and I really like locked it away. And when I finally felt like I had permission to listen to it, I was very surprised as to the things that it said, because I felt like I have some wisdom inside of me. Like, I feel like this voice is like, this is not a bad voice. This voice isn't telling me to do these evil things. This voice is actually telling me, encouraging me to do things that are quite subversive in the culture that we live in today, in terms of like, you know, being more unifying and being more loving and making space for more people. Like, I feel like these are things that I feel like I'm being led to do inside, and I've crushed that away for so long in favor of listening to what everybody else thought that I should be doing.
Yeah, totally. It's just that growth from, I don't know, being subjected to that institutional control really makes you feel small and insignificant.
Yeah.
And you assume that these, you know, growing up, that these adults and authority figures know what they're talking about. They must know more than me. And some people never get out of that infantile stage, and they always assume that because someone's written a book, someone has like made a Christian movie, someone has done that, like a sermon series, that they know what they're talking about.
Yep.
And it's hard to watch, but once you actually have done the kind of intellectual deep dive, you go, these people don't know what they're talking about. And that's really freeing.
Right. Oh man. Yeah, I had this one experience where, I'm not going to mention any names or positions, but I was exploring Bart Ehrman on the podcast, and I was mentioning some of his books. He actually came on and talked to me, and I got some pushback from people from the world that I used to live in. And one really big name person from that world was sending me these direct messages and telling me, you know, how concerned that he was for me and things. And one of my friends, who's still a friend today, who was close with that person, said, the funny thing is that you're being warned not to read Bart Ehrman. He said, I can guarantee that man has never read a Bart Ehrman book in his life. He's just telling you not to read those things. And he said he genuinely thinks that that's the right thing. Like, he's not trying to be manipulative. He's not trying to be bad. He's not trying to shame you. He said he genuinely believes that this is not something that you should explore. And therefore, he hasn't explored it himself either. He said, so if you were to talk to him about things that you're learning with Bart, you see, he would probably like some of the things that you're learning, because it's actually quite interesting. But he said, because he's so closed off to it, and because there's so much control around that, and what, you know, policing, again, going back to that conversation about what you can and can't read, it's like all those lines are so blurred. you can't really see it. And so I always thought that was interesting that, the people who are so adamantly against certain things have probably never had any exposure to them at all. And I know that was true for me for a long time because I had my own list of things that you should never do when I was a pastor, and I had never been exposed to any of them. But somehow I knew better.
It's so weird because it manifests in such a cult-like way, but there's no true centralized figure telling you you can't explore this information.
That's right.
It's like this mind, like hive mind thing that happens that does manifest like a cult. And it's a strange phenomenon.
That's right. So weird. All right, Blair. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, where's that even come from? But
Yeah, exactly. Hey, man, we're just about out of time, but this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you, and I appreciate your just the honesty that you're bringing to your music. And I think, I'm going to share this out on the podcast, obviously, some of the songs and stuff, but I feel like you really are helping people put words on feelings they have and probably making people feel less alone, because I know for myself, and I'm sure you can speak to that too, the loneliness and the deconstruction journey, especially when you first start and it feels like everybody is looking at you like you're crazy, can be a very lonely place to kind of go inside and never share anything. But I think having someone like yourself who's writing music and putting actual words on people's feelings is a huge ministry, and I really honor you for that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's why I do it.
That's awesome. And where can people go? I mean, obviously you can go to Apple Music, Spotify to get your stuff, but any particular places in social media or the other online parts of the world you want to point us to?
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram. Go to Blair Coyle Music. Follow me on there. And I am also on Bandcamp if you want to donate towards buying my new EP, Apostasy Anthems. And you can also, if you like vinyl, you can grab my new EP on vinyl as well.
Awesome.
So the links are on my Instagram there. And if you want to see some of my music videos and stuff, probably best place to go is blaircoylemusic.com.
Awesome. Well, I'll put the links in the show notes, and maybe we can do it again sometime.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
My friend.
Is this what resurrection looks like? Losing your religion to find true life. Sermons sitting in a pew, you know I've heard more than a few. But I looked deeper and I found a lot of lies. And I found it kinda hard to know what's right, 'cause I'd been indoctrinated for my whole life. Staying here, don't go out there, there's a lot of things out there to fear. So I'll step outside to see for myself, and I'll take it one step at a time. I try to run ahead, but I'm falling behind. I search the world looking for the light, just to find it's right here inside. Well, I've known so much love and so much light, running through the fields and chasing blue skies. Nothing but the earth beneath and the wind blowing through the trees. These are the things you'll never take from me, and I'll take it one step at a time. I try to run ahead, but I'm falling behind. I search the world looking for the light, just to find I'm going back to when all I ever knew was love. When I looked with wonder at all that was, before they told me that I'd never be but I've got this heart and that's enough. I've got this heart and that I trust. So I'll take it one step at a time. I try to run ahead, but I'm falling behind. I search the world looking for the light, just to find that all is right here inside. That all is right here inside. Well, there's still so many answers left to find. I'll never see the end. Well, I'm still alive. Few things will stay the same, but faith, hope, and love, they will remain.